So excited that you're joining us online. My name is Dustin Bramer. I'm the Connections Pastor here at Hope. What a crazy week we've had. Postponements, cancellations, school shutting down, not to mention the whole toilet paper and food thing. If I'm being honest, I got a house full of kids, and those kids usually bring friends over, so we're pretty much out of toilet paper and food on a weekly basis. If you really think about it, all these churches across the country are going to online services, or most of them are. There's probably a stockpile of paper towels and toilet paper. If you really, really get desperate, we can probably give you a roll or two. We're excited that you're joining us. Here at Hope Church, we strive to be a Christ-centered community. Not just a Christ-centered community, a fearless, relevant, and most certainly a relentless Christ-centered community with a mission to help people follow Christ together for new life. That word together kind of takes on a different meaning over the last couple days and couple weeks. We are together. We may not be under the same roof, but we definitely are together. We may not be shoulder to shoulder and hand to hand, but we are together. We're worshiping together, we're gathering around the gospel together, and we're continuing to do life together. We want to thank you for being part of that. We want to thank you for inviting us into your rooms, whether that's your living room, whether that's your bedroom, or around your kitchen table, whether you're alone or you're by yourself. We want to thank you for helping us to do church. We are honored to be a part of this. And we want you to sing. We want you to worship with us. This isn't where you just sit and you're quiet. We want you to lift your voices up. Now that may seem a little bit weird, especially if you've got people gathered around you, but you're not worshiping them. You're worshiping our great God. Brian Mills is going to be up here in a few minutes. We're continuing our mental health series. He's going to be talking about how important spiritual health is to our community right now, how important spiritual health is to physical health, personal health, and public health. And Hopers, we want you to stay tuned to the very end. Troy's going to be talking about how you can continue to stay on mission here at Hope. Remember, church, the church is and never has been a building. It's us. It's you. It's that group you're gathering around with right now, and it's how we express our faith, and it's how we express our trust in our great God. He is and will always be in control. Let's worship him.
Well, good morning. We're so glad that you are joining us online here at our Facebook and YouTube and all around the city. We're so glad. We're so glad in all of our rich history of 113 years that we're on time for once. We're all gathered together. No, I'm just messing with you. But my name's Jackson Price, and we do want to welcome you to this live stream of worship at Hope Church. So let's put ourselves in a place where we can hear from God. And I know you might be watching on a small screen or a big screen or whatever, but let's allow God to speak his truth over us during this time. Listen to this verse as it comes out of Psalm 105. It says, "Give thanks to the Lord, call on his name, make known among the nations what he has done. Sing to him, sing praise to him, tell of his wonderful acts. Glory is in his name. Let the hearts of those who seek the Lord rejoice. Look to the Lord and his strength. Seek his face always." We're going to invite you to sing this out. Might feel a little strange, but you're not standing shoulder to shoulder. You're standing before your God. We're sitting. But let's sing this together. We need no other hiding place. Our hope is safe within your name. This we know. This we know. You promise never to forsake. You promise never to forsake. Yeah. What you began, you will sustain. This we know. This we know. Let's sing this. And I will call upon the Lord, for he alone is strong enough to save. Christ, your shackles are no more, for Jesus Christ has broken every chain. There is freedom in the name of Jesus. We lift it together. All of the heavens announce the fullness of your word. This we know, this we know. And let's claim this together. And every enemy will flee as we declare your victory. This we know, this we know. And I will call upon the Lord, for he alone is strong enough to save. Rise, your shackles are no more, for Jesus Christ has broken every chain. I will call upon the Lord, for he alone is strong enough to save. Rise, your shackles are no more, for Jesus Christ has broken every chain. Oh, there's power in his name. There's power in the name of Jesus. There's power in his name. Let's sing Jesus' name will break every stronghold. In Jesus' name will break every stronghold. Freedom is ours as we call his name. In Jesus' name above every other. Oh, hail the power of Jesus' name. Here we go. In Jesus' name will break every stronghold. Freedom is ours when we call his name. Jesus' name above every other. Oh, hail the power of Jesus' name. Oh, hail the power of Jesus' name. I will call upon the Lord, for he alone is strong enough to save. Come on! Rise, your shackles are no more, for Jesus Christ has broken every chain. I will call upon the Lord, for he alone is strong enough to save. Rise, your shackles are no more, for Jesus Christ has broken every chain. He's broken every chain. We lift the name of Jesus across this city. We lift the name of Jesus. All right. Well, thank you so much for trying that and singing with us. And you can just sense the body of Christ all over this area, just waking up to his spirit. And if you would, in the comment section as we continue worshiping, if there is one word that God is to you this week, maybe he is your stronghold, maybe he is your deliverer, maybe he is your fortress, maybe he is your shelter, whatever it is, that you just say the one word. And we're going to do a worship of words, just one word on Facebook in the comment section. And that way we can just connect to each other that way. So let's continue singing as we look to God's promises.
Wait for the walls to fall. I know a name that will bring them down. I've got a praise waking within my soul.
heads and bow our hearts and pray to the Lord our God. God, we thank you so much, Lord, that you are the God who fulfills his word, that you are the God of the promise, Lord, that you uphold us, you sustain us, Lord, with your righteous right hand. And God, we give you the glory today for the good things that you have done. Lord, we give you the glory for who you are, and that you are uniting us all under the name of Jesus. And Lord, we thank you for the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. We identify with that. We look to that. We say thank you. We worship your name because of you, Father, because you are so good. And Lord, we sing this out to you this morning. Amen. It's just a simple chorus, and it goes like this. God, you're so good. God, you're so good. Sing this in worship. Oh God, you're so good. You're so good to me. If you have children around you, invite them to sing with us. God, you're so good. God, you're so good. God, you're so good. You're so good to me. Let's sing that. God, you're so good. God, you're so good. God, you're so good. God, you're so good. You're so good to me. Lord, we thank you that you are good. Lord, we thank you that you are good. So this morning, we have a rare treat, and we don't do this a lot, but we really want families to worship together. And sometimes when we see the face of a child, it really does give us so much hope that there's so much good just in a child's face as they love, as they worship, as they participate in worship. And so we want to invite Curtis Batchelder, our children's pastor, and he's going to be talking to a few kids that we have here of the volunteers and staff as we talk about our good and great God. So take a look at this.
I'm so glad you guys were able to make it out here today. Can you guys believe that you're probably the only kids in the entire building? That is so cool, but kind of scary. This morning when I walked in through the kids area with no lights on, I'm like, this place is kind of scary out here with no lights on. It kind of reminds me of this place that I grew up. When I was a little kid, I grew up in these apartments that during the day, it was so much fun. They had trees to climb, bushes to hide in. We had our own playground. Plus, we had a creek that ran right along the side of our apartments that we got to play in. It was so much fun until it got dark. When it got dark, I struggled. All the noises the trees make and bushes make as they scrape against the walls. I remember trying to go to sleep in my room, and it was so scary with shadows crossing my window, the trees making noise, and people moving around. I was so afraid. There were many nights that I struggled to sleep. I would cry. I would find my brother, snuggle up into him, and just cry, trying to make myself go to sleep because I was so afraid. But I remember this day. I'm telling you, it changed my life. I was in Sunday school, and my Sunday school teacher asked this question, are there things that scare you? And when she said that, I'm like, yeah, there is. She said it. And she said, you know what? I want you to know that we have a God that loves you so very much that there's no place you can go, there's no place you can be that he's not with you. That he loves you so much. And then she told us a story out of Mark 4. It was a story about Jesus and his friend. Jesus and his friends, they had spent all weekend with a lot of people, and they were exhausted. So Jesus suggested, why don't we get into a boat, and we'll go to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, and we'll find a place to rest. And the guys were like, yeah, that's a great idea. So they got into the boat, and Jesus was so tired, this is funny to me, that he got in the boat. He found a pillow, then he found a place to lay down, and he went to sleep. He was sound asleep in just minutes after he got on that boat. His friends were like, oh, that's okay. We can sail boats, no problem. We'll take it across the Sea of Galilee. And everything was going great until they got out into the middle of the sea. Then we find a storm came, hit them. It was horrible. It started to pound them with rain and wind. They're shaking the boat back and forth, and the waves got so huge, they were landing inside the boat. And they were so afraid. They did everything they could. They battened down the hatches. They tied down things, but everything they tried failed. They were so afraid. They were looking at each other, we're all going to die. And then one of their friends said, hey, where's Jesus? Let's get Jesus. And that's what they did. They made their way to the back of the boat, and they found Jesus. He was still asleep on that pillow. It makes me laugh. And one of them grabbed Jesus, hey, Jesus, don't you care that we're all going to die? Jesus woke up and he saw his friends. He saw that they were terrified. And he did this. He made his way to the front of the boat. And as he was standing there, as the boat's rocking back and forth, the rain's pounding on him, he looked at his friends, and they're looking at him like, what's he going to do? And Jesus looked back at the sea, and he put his hand up, and he said, quiet, be still. In that instant, the rain stopped, the wind stopped, the boat was still rocking slowly. The men looked all around, like, what just happened? They looked at it, the storm was gone, the sun was shining. Then they looked back at Jesus, and one of them said, who is this guy that even the wind and the waves obey him? My teacher ended that story saying, you know what the best thing those men did? When they were terrified, when they were scared, they went to Jesus. I'm telling you, that day changed my life. I can still remember the night. It wasn't that very night, but a couple of days away, I was in my bed, I was frightened, and I was getting ready to bawl. And I heard my teacher say, go to Jesus. And so right there in my bed, as I just started praying, it changed my life. And I'm telling you, God loves you so very much. There's no place you can go. There's nothing you could do that he is not with you. And my challenge to you is when next time you're afraid, next time you're scared, go to Jesus in prayer. Thank you guys for coming. Let's head off. Let's go.
What an honor it is to be with you today in so many different places. Really glad that you joined in, and what it says to me is this, that you understand this truth that's become really clear to our board and our staff in the last few days. We keep repeating it just to remind ourselves, but we're also wanting to share it with other people. Here's the truth that's keeping us focused right now. It's this: spiritual health is vital to public health and also to mental health. Let me say that again. Spiritual health is vital to public health and to mental health. And so I'm so glad that wherever you are today, whatever you're doing, that you chose to take time to plug in with us, your congregation. Hopers are everywhere. I've heard stories about people checking in from San Francisco and from Montgomery, Texas even. I know there's some people in Florida checking in right now, and there's even a group way up in Williamsville, believe it or not. Mr. John, if you know Mr. John Frentz, he's actually in a hazmat suit right now protecting that small home from whatever he might be bringing in. So we're so glad that you consider this important. We really do think that's true. We think it's true that spiritual health is vital to all other forms of health. And who would have known, who would have been able to anticipate that right now, in the middle of our series on mental health, that we'd be going through something that produces so much anxiety. If you're just joining us, if you haven't been here for the last few weeks, we're in a series called Restore My Soul, where we've been talking about mental health in a manic age. And I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a lot of mania, going on out there and in here. And I'm not going to go back over that series. You're welcome to check in on that through our app and get caught up with our other videos and podcasts and things. But today we're going to take a little bit of a detour and kind of focus on the moment that we're in. We're going to focus on today. And I think there are still some mental health angles to what we need to talk about. But there are 3 principles that we've been trying to use as a church to navigate the difficult decisions that are hitting us every day as the story changes constantly. It's these 3 principles: pay attention, stay present, and be wise. I gotta let you in on a little secret. I feel a little embarrassed to admit this, but my friends who are Christian leaders are really kind of driving me nuts. All they're doing is they're shouting at you to say, don't be afraid, stop being afraid, don't be anxious. And in my own experience, that never works with a scared person, does it? Have you ever been calmed down by somebody looking at you and saying, don't be afraid? I think there are more helpful responses. And what it seems to me is that what God does through His Son and through His Spirit and through His church is it doesn't just tell you to stop being afraid, but He meets you in the circumstances that are generating the fear. And what He comforts you with is that He's paying attention to what's around and helping you get perspective. And He meets you in that moment by being present with you. And then by holding space with you, He offers wisdom. It helps you to navigate the difficult decisions and the difficult emotions that you have. So that's how we're trying to do this. And I want to encourage you to do the same thing, that you would pay attention to everything going on around you and that you would stay present and that you would be wise. I want to ask you to turn to Psalm 95 this morning. This is one of my favorite places to turn in scary times, in times where there's a lot to try to wrestle with and deal with. And I think uniquely today, because we're not able to gather in a familiar place like our building, I think uniquely today, this passage speaks to us. It's a psalm that was written, Psalm 95, it was a psalm that was written maybe 1,000 years before Jesus. And so think in a different context, in a different time, the psalm is really speaking to what we're experiencing. And I think like a lot of the Old Testament, a lot of it is still very relevant to us today. Did you know that kind of this whole public health practice actually was born in the Old Testament? It's funny, I've had people ask me all kinds of questions. The 2 dominant questions I keep getting pressed with are this. Number 1, hey, are you listening to the experts out there? Did you read the latest thing, and do you know what's happening, and have you talked to so-and-so? And yes, I promise you we have. We're staying tuned into public health guidance, and I have friends in law enforcement and in the medical community and scientists and other people, other church leaders and other places really trying to navigate these waters. So yeah, we do care what they think. And by the way, I think that our professionals and our public health officials are servants. So they deserve our honor and respect. They're trying to help us. I know many of them who are Christians. We have many hopers in those fields, and so they're really trying to wrestle with what needs to happen here for common good, for the good of our city and for you. And so, yeah, we respect their voices, and we're going to listen to them. But the other set of voices that keep coming at me is this one is, well, don't you trust God? Like I thought you believed in miracles and stuff. Like if you trusted God and believed in miracles, wouldn't you just go ahead and have church, and wouldn't you just go ahead and do your thing? And man, I got to tell you that there's a difference between believing in miracles and being a snake charmer. Do you see the difference? You know, after you get sick, yeah, I believe in miracles, we pray for miracles, and that's awesome. But before we get sick, I'm going to avoid the sickness. I don't want to rush into that. Here at Hope, we actually believe that science is our friend. Somehow, some time ago, there became this narrative that science and faith are in opposition and in a big fight, and God's not part of that fight. He's not fighting with science. In fact, I think God sees science as a way that we can know the world better, the world that He made, and it's a way that we can know Him better and ourselves and how He made us, and I think science is a beautiful thing. I think technology is a blessing of God that does heal diseases, and it does help us manage life better. And frankly, for all the people who are talking about all the miracles that they want to see happen and what the church ought to be championing, they're not giving up their air conditioning or their cell phones or their automatic transmissions in their cars. They still like technology and they like human intervention over here, but when it comes to church and sickness, don't you believe in God? Yes, we believe in miracles, and we should be praying for those. Right now, you should be praying for that. But science is our friend, and these people are our brothers and sisters in Christ, and they're servants of the community. And actually, when you look back in the Bible, just before we get to Psalm 95 here, when you look back in the Bible, what you learn is that the biblical worldview introduced public health standards that were novel in the ancient world. It was novel. The ancient world didn't have the same kinds of quarantines and protections and infection controls and regulations and officials that we have today. They had sorcery. They believed that sorcerers and magicians could conjure up spells and make the weather gods happy and make you healthy. And what God said in Leviticus was a little different. Now, I know Leviticus might be foreign to you because at the beginning of the year, we all start our annual Bible reading plan, and we get real gung-ho, and, we're also going to the gym at that time, and our budgets are pretty well balanced. But by the time we hit Leviticus, we're like, yeah, I'm lost here. I can't keep going. Here's the value of that stuff that's in Leviticus. You learn about a quarantine. God instituted quarantine for people who already had infections. So maybe you caught something and didn't know how. Then God said you needed to be removed from the general population. Maybe you came into contact with a dead body by accident or even out of love. You happened to be there when a loved one died, or maybe you were out in the fields and one of your animals died. When you come into contact with a dead body, then you need to be quarantined. Or maybe a skin rash of some kind. I mean, it gets really kind of nasty in Leviticus. It's another reason why we don't like to read it. It kind of makes your skin crawl a little bit. But there were quarantines for coming into contact with that kind of stuff. And then even mold in your kitchen. And I know you're not looking in your kitchen right now to see all the mold there. This is not cleaning time. This is worship time. You can put that off. But even mold in kitchen, God had a quarantine approach to dealing with those houses after you got the infection. But he didn't just deal with the infection after you got it. There were regulations, public health regulations to help you avoid getting the infection to begin with. And so he labeled certain foods clean and other foods unclean, and certain practices clean and unclean so that you wouldn't get infected. And it wasn't about being mean to the unclean people. It was about protecting everybody, and especially the most vulnerable in society, who were the most likely to get the infection. He didn't want that to happen, so he wanted to put these regulations in force. And there were public health officials. At that time, they called them priests. I'm so glad that practice has changed, because those priests, they would have people coming to them saying, hey, I got this rash, Pastor. Could you look at this rash? And no, I'm so glad. It's not in my job description. You need to go somewhere else for that. But these priests were public health officials who had the job of trying to evaluate with an uneducated people, trying to evaluate, is this a clean thing or an unclean thing? And they had the beautiful opportunity to say both things. Yes, this is unclean, and there's a way to deal with it. But there was a grace in the other pronouncement to say, oh, this is clean. You're free and clear now. Get back in with the rest of society and reconnect. It was God who introduced these practices to the ancient world. And actually in history beyond this, it's been Christians who've been willing to cross that line of infection, cross that line of sickness, to take risks with leper colonies, to take risks with children who had been sick and abandoned by first century Roman homes because the Roman family didn't want to get sick, and so the kid had to go out and fend for themselves. It was Christians who crossed that line to try to help the sick people. But they didn't just accept risk, they also accepted the consequences that came with that risk. That if they're going to step into that group, it might mean that they would themselves have to be quarantined for some time. So that's a thing to be very prayerful about and not macho about. So that's kind of how we're approaching our current situation. That's how we're thinking about it. For us, this is what it means to pay attention and to stay present and to be wise. But Psalm 95 speaks into our experience in a really specific and helpful way. And I want to invite you to look with me in Psalm 95, verse 1. You're going to see the word come 3 times. And it means 3 different things each time. I'll kind of lay each out for you. Read with me. Verse 1. Come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. This word for come means like, hey, come on, let's go for a walk. Let's go for a walk together. We're going to hit Sangamon Valley Trail over here in the neighborhood. It's a decently nice day. Let's go for a walk together. Come, let's go. And we'll sing for joy to the Lord. Let us shout aloud to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before him with thanksgiving and extol him with music and song. The second word for come is slightly different, and it means let's meet together. Let's talk together. So the first one is, hey, let's go for a walk together. The second one is like, hey, let's talk together. We need to have a conversation. And in that conversation, we're going to talk about how God generates our thankfulness. And we're going to give him praises. Verse 3, here's why. Because he's the great God, the great King above all gods. Now, this is huge. This was a monotheistic culture, which was really strange. Most of the other cultures at the time, 1,000 years before Jesus, believed in many gods. And those gods were only in control of a small part of reality. So you had a God that might be in charge of the sky or the rain or the sun. You had a God that might be in charge of the land or the ocean. You had a God that might be in charge of the animals or in charge of health or in charge of fertility, able to make you able to have kids. You had gods who were over small pieces of reality. And what this psalmist is saying is we believe in a God who's over all those other gods, which means this. No matter what the experiences are, no matter what the challenges are, no matter what the blessings are, all of that is under the authority and the reign and the rule and the love and the grace of one God, and we call him Father. It is a powerful way to think about worship. And then he gets more specific. Verse 4, he says, in his hand are the depths of the earth. And when he talks about the depths of the earth, he's talking about mysterious and scary places. There's a dark tone there. He's not just talking about the big valley crevice or a cave or something. He's talking about places that are mysterious and scary. In his hand are the depths of the earth, and the mountain peaks belong to him as well, even the top wonderful places where you can see everything. Verse 5, the sea is his, for he made it, and his hands formed the dry land. The sea, same thing. It's kind of a dark image. It's a scary image because we don't know what's under the surface of the deep. You can't see what's down there. And there are many ancient myths and stories and legends about these terrible monsters that were lurking under there just to take your boat down and get your sailors. And this psalmist is saying, come on, let's go for a walk. We need to talk about some things. Let me tell you about a God who is God over everything. Everywhere. All the other gods. The high places and the low places, the open places and the deep unseen places. He's God over all of it. And now, the third use of the word come, verse 6, he says, so then, come, let us bow down in worship. And this kind of a come is like, come on in. It's come, let's go for a walk. Come, let's talk together. And then this one is, why don't you come on in? Come on into his temple. Come on into his holy place, and let's bow down in worship. And here's why. We can kneel before the Lord our Maker, for he is God, and we are the people of his pasture, the flock under his care. Such brilliant, wonderful images here. There are some people scholars who have looked back at Genesis 1 and 2 in the creation account and tried to understand what it means. And sometimes we get hung up on, was it 24-hour days, and did it happen in this order, and what about evolution? There are a lot of legitimate questions to deal with there, but there are some scholars who are backing away from the page a little bit, and what they see when they back away is there's another image. That what's happening in Genesis 1 and 2, it kind of looks like the way the ancient Near East would build a temple for a god, one of these other small gods. They would build this big structure, and there were certain stages and phases to it, of course, and you'd have to make a foundation, you'd have to build pillars, and you have to make it where you could see through the sky. You'd have to do all this stuff to arrange it, and then eventually, once the temple was built, then you would take the image of the god, a stone idol or made out of wood. You would take the image of a god, and you would take that god and put him in the temple. And in sitting there, now you would know who that temple was dedicated to. Well, these scholars are saying Genesis kind of looks like that's what's happening. That there's a foundation, and there's a sky opened up, and there are these pillars. There's this structure being created, and then there's an image of the God being put in that temple, and that image is mankind, who is made in the image of God, male and female. And so if that's the case, maybe what Genesis is describing and Psalm 95 is pointing us back to is this. Maybe God's temple isn't a building. In ancient Jerusalem or west side of Springfield, maybe God's house isn't a building. Maybe God's temple really is the way the rest of Scripture describes when it says that heaven is his throne and the earth is his footstool. See, he doesn't need walls. He can't be contained in a structure like this, but his temple is everywhere. So now in Psalm 95, when he's calling, the psalmist is saying, come, let's go for a walk. We need to talk about some things. And now why don't you come in and worship with me in the true, big temple of the God who's over every other God? And he says, because we are the people of his pasture, the flock under his care. So all of that big theological truth is really applied to we are a flocking people. We belong together. Naturally, we huddle together. We have these natural instincts to be in groups together, and we are most at home, most at peace, not in the sheep pen, but in the pasture. The green pasture, and he leads us to new pastures all the time. He's mobile, and he's not locked in by a fence, and he's not locked in by a temple. You see how freeing this is for God. First of all, he gets out of his box that we've stuffed him in. But do you see how freeing it is for us too? In this really unique and historic time, we don't have to wonder where God is, or if he's with us, or how can he be with us if I can't get to church? I hope you'll think about praying this prayer as an encouragement, as a family. And that you'll draw in, if you're outside, if you're walking around, if you're exercising, if you're driving, whatever you're doing, as you're looking around and seeing the presence of God in his temple and near you, can you be encouraged? Now there is a warning, and we need to go to that part next and finish this up. The next part of verse 7, he says, today, if you hear his voice, don't harden your heart. And so the finger wagging comes out here. There is a point to be made. Now, don't harden your heart. If you're hearing the voice of that God we've just talked about, if you sense his presence, then you have a choice to make. And this isn't about history, and this isn't about theology and science. This is about you in your life and the choice that you get to make today. If you're in Florida, if you're in Texas, if you're in California, if you're even in Springfield, Illinois, wherever you are right now, you have a choice. Today, if you hear his voice, don't harden your hearts. Now, I don't know what experiences in your life have caused you to harden your heart. In my life, there are some different things that caused my heart to get hardened. One of the experiences was in 5th and 7th and 9th grade. I got dumped by the same girl 3 times. Didn't you feel bad for me? I know it's not a surprise to you that I would have some relationship challenges. Chantel is an incredibly gracious and godly woman to be able to love. You know, that's an example of unconditional love right there. But in 5th grade, I hadn't met that yet. And so there was this friend and thought she was great 3 different times. And so that broke my heart. And a broken heart with those rejected feelings can become kind of cynical and hard-hearted. But that's not this kind of hard heart. This kind of hard heart, we're going to see in 3 specific examples. This kind of hard heart is coming from fear and unbelief. When he says don't harden your hearts, he's saying don't do that. Don't harden your hearts like you did in these other 3 settings. And so in verse 8, he says don't harden your hearts like you did at Meribah. This is a reference to a story that happened back in Exodus 17. They had just been freed from 400 years of slavery with the Egyptians, and they're wandering through the desert, and they aren't on the road very long before they start to get thirsty, and they're like, oh my gosh, Moses, there's no Starbucks or Sonic anywhere. Did you bring us out here just to die? They grumbled against God. They instantly lost faith that God was with them. And this was their question, is the Lord among us or not, Moses? And they were afraid that there wasn't any water. And what the psalmist is saying, maybe 400 years after that event, he's saying, that was a hard heart because you didn't trust the God who just got you out of Egypt. Why wouldn't you trust him just a few days later? The second reference in that same verse, he said, or don't harden your hearts as you did that day at Massah in the wilderness. This is a reference back to Numbers 14 when they're looking into the promised land. They've sent spies on ahead and they heard these terrible reports about giants. These giants are mean, they're tough, they're going to snuff us out, they're going to kill us. And now you should have heard the whining and the complaining. And they were mad at Moses and they were mad at God. And they're like, you abandoned us, we're going to die here in the desert. We should have stayed in slavery. They were having a hard heart out of unbelief and fear. In the question that they were asking there, they were asking the question, is the Lord with us? And Moses and God himself both tried to say, yes, the Lord is with you. Just face the giants. But third, jumping ahead to verse 11, the psalmist says this, so I declared on oath in my anger, they shall never enter my rest. This was God's reaction to their hard-heartedness and their unbelief. The fact they just couldn't decide to trust him in the difficult time. And this reference to rest goes all the way back to early in their history as God's making promises to the Hebrew people. But specifically, I think it refers to 2 Samuel chapter 7. David has been king for a little while. He's got a great big palace. He's started to set up the capital. He's trying to unite a divided kingdom. It's very, very unstable. And he realizes, I can't bring stability to this government by myself. He's been a great warrior, a great leader, and everybody's excited that he's king. But he understands trying to bring two nations together and have one nation and a stable government isn't going to work if people don't know where God is. And so he sees his own palace, and he's like, I'm glad I have my palace, but God, I need to make you a temple. And God just scratches his head and said, when did I ask you for a temple? When did I tell you I needed a temple? I don't need that. And David is like, but no, I think you do. And they have this conversation back and forth, and God says, David, I've been with you wherever you've gone. Remember when you were a shepherd going from pasture to pasture to pasture? Remember as you were running from Saul in the desert and cave to cave to cave and wilderness? He said, I've been with you wherever you've gone. And you didn't have a temple then. So the rest of God isn't a temple. You see, the reality is for rest and to have a soft heart and a good heart, a healthy heart with God is this. We've never needed a temple. We've just needed faith. And God's never needed a temple. He's just needed our attention. And that's what we give him when we come in to worship. Man, this story, this psalm, this verse, and the other stories attached to it really encourage me, and I hope they encourage you. Practically, they inspire me to three things. And you're welcome. There's no fill in the blanks today on your notes. But I would encourage you to write these things down. It's back to the three things we said at the beginning. Number one, if this is who God is encouraging us about himself and about who we need to be, then first of all, we need to pay attention. We do need to pay attention to what's happening locally and globally. We need to be engaged. We need to know what's happening. We need to be aware of what has happened in history. We need to remind ourselves of how God has helped and how he has been there. And we need to learn from lessons in history. Pay attention to all that. We need to pay attention to the conversation now and being involved in that conversation with each other in a meaningful way. We need to pay attention to our neighbors. We need to pay attention to how people are feeling. We can't just tell people to stop being afraid. We need to let them talk about why they're afraid. This is what's needed in trauma and grief, is for people to give voice to that. Mental health doesn't come when you just tell people to stop being afraid. You need to pay attention and help them to pay attention to what's really sticking out in their minds, in their hearts. I think when we pay attention to the people and the needs around us, but also pay attention to the God around us, it can really be helpful. Second of all, we got to stay present. There's such a temptation right now to escape. Don't you feel it? Don't you feel the need to escape? I thought it was really funny and sad at the same time when I read the article about how alcohol is flying off the shelves of the grocery stores, almost more than toilet paper, because we're really afraid of being locked in our house for 2 weeks with no booze. How are we going to make it? And maybe alcohol isn't the way you escape. Maybe for you it's Netflix or brownie or a pizza, but we're all looking to escape the situation that we're in. What if instead you chose to be present in it, to face the water shortage, to face the giants, to face the unstable government, but choose to believe by faith that God is with you in that challenge, and you don't have to escape. Be present with each other. And I know that's hard in a time where we're social distancing, and I get that, and you should social distance, and all that makes total sense, but you could make a phone call, you could text, you could even FaceTime. You might need to put on regular clothes and not your pajamas, but you could FaceTime. And so there are people who need to be quarantined, who need to be away because they're more vulnerable. They need to be cut away, or maybe they've been exposed to something. They need to be on their own, yes, but that doesn't mean they have to be isolated. Pray about who's vulnerable to being isolated right now and who needs you to reach out to them. Instead of just worrying about what you are vulnerable to, what if you put your energy toward the others who are vulnerable and spent some energy to reach out, to love, to connect, to be present with them. Third, just be wise. Just be wise. This isn't all on your shoulders to fix. None of us have that kind of power. We've got to trust God. We do need to listen to the officials and the smart people and the other believers around us who are really trying to serve us and help us with this, but we also need to just trust God. We need to trust a higher government than our own government. We need to trust a higher government than our own scientific community. We need to trust a higher government for wherever our own limitations are, and we have a few. We need to be wise. So that's why we're asking you to find new and creative ways to gather as a community. You can't really cancel worship. You can't cancel the church because we are a people who worship. And so we can do that on our own. We can do that in our homes, in smaller groups, or even in just our families. We can do that as we go out for walks, as we choose to exercise outside instead of at the gym. Maybe as we do some house projects and invite a buddy over who can help you with those house projects. Your yard, by the way, your yard better be the best yard this spring that it's ever been. You've got nothing else to do, right? So just get in your yard, start raking, start fertilizing, make it awesome. Really put that energy to something productive. Turn off the screens, read a book, play some games, engage your family. This could be a wonderful opportunity to employ some wisdom for presence. And my guess is that's how our anxiety is ultimately going to be calmed. I want to invite you to join us every day for prayer over the next 14 days. Now, I'm not necessarily asking you to come here to do that. We are going to have our building open this week. We want to keep it open, but we do need to limit the numbers to respect and honor what the public health officials have said, so we need to keep that to under 100 people. But we want to invite you to gather here for prayer every night the next 14 days, starting on Monday at 6:30 p.m., but also to invite you to check in on our Free Refills podcast and to read with us Psalm 120 to 134 and stay plugged into social media. We want to lead your prayers as a congregation over the next 14 days, whether you're here or at home or wherever. And Bill Kinzer, by the way, I know you thought you wouldn't get picked on video, but guess what? We want you to stay home, buddy. You're in a vulnerable category, and we don't want you to get sick. And there might be others of you in a vulnerable category as well. You do need to stay home. If you have any symptoms at all, don't be here. We don't want to make anybody at any kind of risk. We need to maintain proper social distancing and hygiene and all that stuff here. But we also need to pray, and we need to stay connected to each other in prayer. Here's the invitation God gives us. Come on. Let's go for a walk. Let's talk together. And maybe you could bow down in his temple. In Jeremiah chapter 29, and I'm closing with this. In Jeremiah chapter 29, God's people are in exile. They're far away from the temple. They're far away from what's familiar. And the false prophets are telling them this isn't going to be very long. Don't worry about it. This isn't going to be a big deal. And God said, no, you're going to be there a while. You'll be there 70 years. But here's what I want you to know. God says through Jeremiah, I'm going to be with you. So here's what you got to do. Build your houses, settle down, plant gardens, have your families, do the daily things. But here's the line in verse 7, Jeremiah 29:7. He says, seek the welfare of the city where I've sent you. Seek the peace and the welfare of your city. Because in their peace, you'll find your peace. You don't have to be around Hope for very long to know that that's what we're about. We're not sitting here worried in a crisis about our own needs. We really want to be available for our city. We're here for the good of our city. So I want to invite you right now to pray with me for this peace from God and for our city. Would you do that? Let's bow together. Jesus, thank you for making your word come alive. And we're so reassured that you're not surprised by sickness and infection. In fact, you've been trying to help us with that a long time. And that your presence helps us when we find ourselves alone, when we're needing to connect with each other, that your presence helps us, Lord, whether we're connected to a building or not. Lord, in these days ahead, I pray that you will awaken our souls and spirits to your presence all around us, and that we can bring your presence to all of the places we inhabit, at work or at home or in our neighborhoods, that we will be a source of peace and shalom because we know you and your presence and your peace. Lord, I pray for incredible blessings and protection during these days ahead. In Jesus' name, amen.
I want to invite you to sing this chorus together. You are here, moving in our midst. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, working in this place. I worship you. I worship you. Sing that again. You are here, moving in our midst. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, working in this place. I worship you. I worship you. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are here, touching every heart. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, healing every life. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, turning lives around. I worship you. I worship you. You are here. You are here, mending every heart. I worship you. I worship you. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Let's sing that. darkness, my God, that is who you are. It's our prayer for today. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Let's sing that. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Sing it. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. You are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. Oh, that is who you are. 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 Oh, that is who you are. That is who you are. That is who you are. That is who you are.
We're so glad you were able to join us this morning. I know that worship felt a little different, but the spirit in which we worship together is the same. You know, I saw this verse being posted on social media, and it came to my mind again this morning as Brian was sharing. It's from 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. And the first part of that verse is what often gets posted and shared. It says this, "For God did not give us a spirit of fear, but of power." And that is so true. When the world, it seems like it's chaos around us and there's all kinds of things that are hitting us from different angles, oftentimes we can be gripped by fear. And those who are around us, that we work with, that we live with, those that we interact with, might be living in that fear. But as Christians, we are gathered through His power, through His Spirit. And that gives us the confidence to be able to handle whatever comes our way. But the second part of that verse is equally as powerful, and it says this, God has given us a spirit of love and of sound mind. As Christians, God has always mobilized His people to be at a part of what God's doing in the world. We truly are His hands and His feet, and He's always called Christians to come stand at the front lines when difficulty strikes in our culture, in our communities, and in our world. And it's equally as important right now as a church that we come together and we mobilize to be there for those who are going through a difficult time. We'd encourage you to continue to partner with us in the mission of our church and the global church by giving. We're not sure what the next few weeks and months might look like, not only for our congregational members, but those in our community that are going to be impacted financially. There might be some local economic crisis that we need to step into, just be present in people's lives that are feeling isolated and alone. But we want to be prepared and be ready to stand on the front lines with people, with you, as we follow up on the mission of the church. We'd encourage you to go to our app, go onto our website, and give and partner with us in that continued mission to impact the world for Him. You know, we are still committed to our relentless campaign. We really believe that God is mobilizing Hope Church to do some really powerful things, and we do want to make sure we're doing those things to take care of our building, to make sure our building is ready to receive people when this crisis is lifted. And we want to see people be able to come here and gather for worship together in unity, shoulder to shoulder again. So continue to be praying about the relentless campaign, how you can partner with us financially. But right now, we want your prayer support, not only for our church, but for the people throughout our community. Asking for your prayers. Gather with us in times of prayer. Continue to follow us on social media as we continue to give you updates of what's going on and what you can expect and what we're doing here as a church to mobilize. because this situation that we're in is new to all of us. And so right now, everything is extremely fluid. And so just continue to engage with us through social media. Find out how you can partner with what's going on here at Hope Church. But thank you so much for your love, your prayers, and your steadfast spirit as we walk through this together. May God bless you. May his face shine upon you, and you feel his blessings on your life in the days and these weeks ahead. May God bless you. We'll see you back here next weekend.